Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT Innovators webinar on SharePoint for nonprofits. If you have questions about file sharing and collaboration at your nonprofit, if you use Microsoft 365 online or you use Teams to collaborate with your colleagues, you probably use SharePoint. Have you been confused about SharePoint in the past? Sometimes SharePoint training is overwhelming. It can be overbuilt, the SharePoint itself, or complicated. So in this webinar, we're very excited to have two experts who can answer some of the most common questions and walk you through ways SharePoint makes sharing files easier. So just a note, that is in fact one of the first points, is that SharePoint does an awful lot, and we don't have time for everything in this hour, so we're going to be talking about it as a file sharer. So our learning objections for this session are that after the session, you'll be able to learn what SharePoint is and how it is used for file sharing, know more about choosing SharePoint as a file storage or sharing solution, and understand concepts about creating file sharing architecture for your nonprofit. I want to remind everyone that Community IT is vendor agnostic, and this presentation is to discuss how nonprofits are using common tools and what we're observing about them, but we aren't making recommendations on any platform in general. We only make recommendations to our clients based on specific business needs and nonprofit culture. We encourage you to submit questions and comments throughout the chat feature today. And we probably won't be able to get to everything. You can always contact us after the webinar for follow-up, but I will be looking at the chat and trying to get those questions to our presenters. If you happen to be watching on YouTube right now, we encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you get updates every time we post a new webinar. And we also invite you to subscribe to our email list on our website. We don't send a lot of emails, but if you do, you'll get a reminder to register for the webinar, and then you can attend in person and ask your questions in real time. So now I would like to let Steve introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Steve Longenecker. I'm the Director of IT Consulting at Community IT. I've been at Community IT for 18 years. I just got the congratulations email yesterday, actually, from our CEO, Johan. So that's quite a milestone. I mark it by the fact that my son, who was in college, was born about a month before I started at Community IT. So I'm pleased to be with you. I've been doing a lot of SharePoint work at Community IT for quite a few years now, and I'm, I guess, considered the practice expert of SharePoint at Community IT, although I'm also sending a lot of work to some of our other technicians because there's a lot of work to do. So it's great to be with you today.
Great, thank you, Steve. And my name is Carolyn Woodard. I'm the Marketing and Outreach Director at Community IT. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited about this topic. If you're not familiar with Community IT, a little bit about us. We are a 100% employee-owned managed services provider. So we provide outsourced IT support. We work exclusively with nonprofit organizations, and our mission is to help nonprofits accomplish their missions through the effective use of technology. We serve nonprofits across the United States, and we've been doing this for over 20 years. We are technology experts, and we are consistently given the MSP 501 recognition for being a top MSP, which is an honor we received again in 2022. So now I'm very happy to introduce our guest speaker from Build Consulting, Kyle Haines. Kyle?
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, Steve, for having me today. And I'm really excited to talk more about SharePoint today. I imagine that I'm going to learn a lot from Steve. And I actually, in thinking about this webinar, remembered that Steve and I worked on a SharePoint implementation together nearly 7 years ago. And I think our understanding of SharePoint has evolved and grown. And I think SharePoint has evolved and grown as well. So I'm just incredibly grateful to be here today and excited to answer questions and to have a great conversation. I can just share a little bit more about Build. We are very similar in many respects to the work that Community IT does, in that we also help organizations that are trying to tackle complex technology questions and figure out how to use technology better to advance their mission. And we, like Community IT, we're passionately independent. So you'll probably hear that a lot today in my commentary, that SharePoint is one solution. We don't always think it's the only solution. And I heard you say a version of that as well, Steve. We focus predominantly on assessments, selections, and helping with implementations. So it's germane to today's webinar because oftentimes we're asked, we have SharePoint, we're not sure we're using it right. Or we've heard a lot about SharePoint, is that the right solution? And we are working to help answer that question, and hopefully today's content enriches your understanding of that and what we've learned through the years. And then next, we oftentimes help organizations select a solution like SharePoint. So just want to share a little bit more about Build. And Carolyn, thank you again for bringing us together today, and I'm really excited for the conversation.
Great to have you, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. All right, so we're putting up the agenda. These are a bunch of questions that we received at the registration, and some more that we hear quite often from clients and prospective clients, and among our networks as well. So this looks like a lot. We're going to try to get to everything, but yeah, it's a lot to take in. There's a lot about SharePoint just as a file sharer. So, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us after this webinar. And also, I want to reassure, I got a couple of questions on the Q&A. So we are recording today. We will be posting the video. We also release it as a 2-part podcast. And then I'll also have a transcript available online as well. So don't worry too much about taking notes. If you want to just pay attention to the conversation, we will be sending out all those links afterwards. All right, so to begin with, we have a poll. Here we go. So are you using SharePoint now? We wanted to get a little gauge for who is in the webinar today, our attendees. So I'll give you a couple of moments to answer. The first option is yes, and I have questions. The second answer is yes, my organization has a hybrid system, part SharePoint, part something else. So you're using SharePoint, and maybe you have some other places that files are shared, or you're considering putting together a hybrid system and have some questions about that. We have the option no, but we're thinking about it. And then the fourth option is not available. Steve, can you see that? Do you want to read the result?
I can see that, yes. And I have surreptitiously tried to move closer to my microphone, so hopefully people can hear me better now.
It's great. Yeah, it's much better.
All right, great. All right, so yes, I have questions, or the first choice was roughly half, 46% of the respondents said, yes, I have questions. 42% were doing it hybrid with SharePoint already. They may have questions too, I suppose. No, we are thinking about it is about 10%, and not applicable, we had one respondent say not applicable.
Okay.
This, just really quickly, just as a reflection on that poll, I mean, it's interesting. Most of our work, I think most people answer when they're engaging with us question 2. They have a little bit of SharePoint, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So it's interesting to see the percentage of people on today's webinar that find themselves in that same situation.
Great. Okay, so we're going to put up this agenda slide just for another little quick reference. And I think we're going to start out with a few kind of fundamentals and basic questions around SharePoint, including if you're brand new to Office 365 and you need help, how SharePoint works. We're going to give you a quick overview. And then we're going to talk a little bit about who should own SharePoint at an organization, how you would choose it, and if you did a project moving to SharePoint, how long does that sort of thing take? What does it cost? Those types of questions. So I want to start with this first one, and I think, Steve, that's the next slide, is how does SharePoint work? An easy one.
So how does SharePoint work? I'll take a stab at this first, and how you can fill in all the gaps I'm sure I'm going to leave here. So SharePoint works like a lot of cloud file sharing storage systems. Competitors would be Google Drive for people who are in the Google platform. Box is a really strong sort of platform that's not necessarily tied to other services as much. And Dropbox is a product that we see some of our nonprofit clients using, and that we've recommended to some of our nonprofit clients in the past, for sure. It sort of comes out of a consumer space, but they have a business version as well. So all of these systems share a couple features. The actual files are not on a server in your server room or in your server closet, the way it used to be in the olden days. That represents right there a huge step up. Instead of being on a single box that you buy and pay for and try to maintain as best you can, and if it fails, you lose all your files. I mean, you probably have a backup, but that's still a big hassle. It's on a service provider's server farm somewhere, and they are responsible for lots of redundancy and lots of and uptime to a certain agreed upon level, a service level agreement. And you don't have to worry about any of that. In this case, the service provider is Microsoft. It's part of the whole Microsoft 365 bundle of services. So a lot of our clients started out with Microsoft 365 for email services. It used to be that you'd put your email on a server as well. That was a long time ago. That's really not a good idea anymore. It's much better to have your email services provided by a service provider. The two big players are Google and Microsoft. But if your email is in Microsoft, it's like not that much harder to start putting your files in Microsoft and to use SharePoint for it.
Steve, I don't want to mean to interrupt, but I wonder if you might put up that other slide just for a moment, because I think that had kind of the different connections that the different Microsoft, different applications have to. There you go. So it is like a web.
It's a lot of things. Thank you, that are all connected together when you're using Microsoft 365. Some of the reasons that we love recommending SharePoint to our clients is that it is part of that Microsoft 365 stack, and so all that integration sort of comes to you out of the box. You don't have to build any of it yourself. And that means that you get Microsoft 365 security features. Your users are probably already used to logging into Microsoft 365 to get email services. So the fact that it's all sort of in one place makes things really powerful. One or two more things about how does it work in general. The files are in the cloud, so you can access them through a browser, certainly, and that was sort of the method that was most common in the olden days. It still is a great way to access the files, especially since it used to be that connecting to something through a web browser was really slow and tedious. But now, all of us have such ubiquitous and strong bandwidth that it's not that slow to do it that way. But you can also sync them to your own computer, and you can access them through File Explorer if you have a Windows computer, or through Finder if you have a Mac computer, and double click on a file, open it, edit it, knowing that in the background, it's going to sync up to the cloud when you're done with the editing, or even while you're editing live and in process.
I mean, I think that, what I might add, and I think that this is probably emblematic of the approach that Build takes, is that understanding how SharePoint works is a challenge for many organizations as they're considering these decisions. And the slide that Carolyn referenced and the information that Steve gave, it's really important that people who are involved in making these selections understand at a high level what is it that we're talking about. And so I always think that organizations that are asking this question are asking the perfect question. What is it that we're talking about? And even though we're not talking about something like a CRM platform, like something similar to Salesforce or Microsoft, when we're involved in beginning to have conversations about what the right tool is, creating an educational foundation so people know what it is that we're talking about is incredibly important. So I love this diagram, Carolyn. I think it's great. And I think that there's probably a number of other resources that you can get from Microsoft or from other vendors that really help people who need to be invested in the decision, the people who are going to be ultimately charged with advocating for the decision and championing the decision, getting them to understand early on what is this thing that we're talking about is incredibly important.
That's a great segue into, I think, the next part that you were going to talk about, Kyle, and ask you about is maybe who owns SharePoint and how one goes about making that choice. But we have a couple of questions that I want to get to from the Q&A. Someone was asking about SharePoint versus OneDrive, which I know we're going to talk about a couple of slides from now. So don't worry, we're going to get to that. And also a question from Jennifer Keller-Jackson about nonprofits starting to use SharePoint when corporate America has been using it for some time. Are there other tools out there on the horizon, or do we feel like SharePoint is, one of the tools going forward, at least for a while?
Do we think I don't think SharePoint's going anywhere.
Yeah.
Okay, but it is notable that Microsoft is sort of burying the original SharePoint user interface more and more in their myriad other like user interfaces. So that's user interface is kind of a techno babble speak, I admit, but it used to be that the only way to access the files that were stored in SharePoint was with a browser, period, full stop. And you went to a SharePoint site that was owned by, well, it used to be that it was owned by your company and your organization and hosted on a server, probably at your, a SharePoint server. Now, you go to something.sharepoint.com and it's on a Microsoft server in a data center somewhere, but it's part of your Microsoft 365 tenant, but you would still go there in a browser. But then you could also sync those files so that you're accessing them through File Explorer, through Finder. We talked about that briefly. But it's also important to note that Microsoft's sort of design principles are to give 18 ways to do the same thing to their customers. It's kind of a spaghetti on the wall, what sticks kind of approach. And no one liked SharePoint. I think it's gotten so much better that in some ways, just when it was finally sort of getting over all of the user interface problems that it had at one time, and I'm sure some people in the longtime developers at Microsoft who were big champions of SharePoint felt this way too. Like, we finally solved all these problems and now you've given up and you're like asking your customers to do things other ways. So now we're going to talk about OneDrive in a little while, but you can access SharePoint libraries through OneDrive. And so your users who don't really understand the technical details don't realize that they are potentially going to a SharePoint library because they're going to it through the OneDrive interface. Similarly, Microsoft's making a huge push on Microsoft Teams, right? It's kind of like supposed to be the new, used to be that everyone started the day in Outlook and ended the day in Outlook, and Outlook was where my contacts were, my email was, my tasks were, everything was in Outlook. And it was so useful because it was all in one place and all integrated. Well, Microsoft wants to recreate that experience in this decade with Teams. Start your day in Teams, end your day in Teams, all your files are in Teams, all your collaborations with your colleagues on the various teams that you're part of are in Teams, your project management's in Teams, everything's in Teams. Well, you can access SharePoint libraries through Teams. And in fact, they're trying to make it almost transparent so that you could spend a fair amount of time in the Microsoft stack using Microsoft SharePoint all day long and never really realize you're using SharePoint. So that does make it the answer to Jennifer's question somewhat complicated. SharePoint's, I think, here to stay, but whether or not it's sort of surfaced as SharePoint for end users, I think that's a question that I have less certainty about. But I don't think that means, we're putting our organization at risk by investing in SharePoint right now, because I think even if you invest in SharePoint, that investment will hold and be useful into the future. It's just that you may find that your users are accessing those files through other means because Microsoft gives you so many different ways to do that. What do you think, Kyle? Did I answer that all right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, maybe I would talk to it from a market perspective. I don't think I think it's unlikely there will be new entrants into the space. I think Google and Microsoft are obviously two of the bigger players. There's some other typically consumer and some corporate applications like Box and Dropbox. I don't think they're going anywhere either. But I think in general, I would be leery in this area of looking at a new entrant into the space to handle such a vital business function. So I would definitely be looking to one of the more stalwart organizations like Google or Microsoft or Box or Dropbox, and there may be others. Those are what come to mind. And I agree with the sentiment. I don't think Microsoft is going anywhere, and I think that for those of us who are old enough to remember when Microsoft meant the operating system on your laptop, and it means something much different now. It's clear that they're very interested in owning this space, and so I think that they're going to continue to make investments in the product. And Steve, you mentioned some of those investments they've made recently.
Yeah, that's a key element. I mean, what you don't want is to have your the service provider for a service as vital as this sort of resting on their product and not continuing to make investments. So it's really helpful that Microsoft is very motivated as a services company first and foremost, that needs to please their customers to keep them, and it's very helpful for all of us that there is a competitive landscape, and there are at least 4 big players in it. I'd say Dropbox is a distant fourth, but Box and Google and Microsoft are all pushing, and so they're pushing each other to continue to improve each of them are improving their products. All of these products are improving every year. Strikingly so, I would say.
No, totally. I'm seeing a couple of the questions coming in chat with kind of some specific questions about sites. So I just want to remind everyone, we're talking about the file sharing today, but I'm seeing enough questions that maybe we can come back and do a separate webinar on sites and how both how to set those up, if that's what the route that you're going to take, but also if you have that as a legacy management, that some people seem to have some questions about continuing that or shifting to this different paradigm where you're using Teams to get the documents or whatever you're using. But I want to make sure that we get Kyle to give us a little bit about who owns SharePoint. And Kyle, if you were putting together like your dream team at a nonprofit of the committee that would make this decision and, take ownership of it, how would that work?
Yeah, and I was really hoping Steve would take this question. I'm bummed that I had to take it. I think that it's going to be, you asked, I love the framing that you just gave me. So let me talk about a dream team. So I think that for many organizations, content, including internal content, is incredibly important. And so my dream team would be somebody who could span the organization and serve the needs of both the entire organization and individual departments in helping to manage, store, and categorize the information that we sort of think of as files. And I think, as I said at the outset, this looks different for different organizations. That said, I think that a well done implementation of SharePoint, and part and parcel with that is Teams and OneDrive. IT is an important stakeholder. And Steve can talk about this probably in greater detail or even challenge this assertion in its entirety. The role of something like Active Directory becomes much more important when you implement SharePoint well, in my view. And for many organizations that I've worked with, Active Directory has been something that has been minimally invested in. It's structured in an ad hoc way or incrementally. And so if an organization was new to SharePoint, I would want to understand, how is Active Directory being used currently? How much thought has been given to how groups and teams are organized and their permissions have been organized around those principles? So I see that owning SharePoint as being something in my dream team as a very tight collaboration between a function outside of IT that's thinking about content in strong partnership with IT.
I agree with that. The one thing I'll just for our listeners who may be blanching at Active Directory. So we're probably, since we're talking about Microsoft 365, we're talking about the Azure Active Directory. So it is this sort of the same thing, but you don't need like Active Directory, the server version, like you may not have it, and that would be fine. Like but I think the larger point is that the way Microsoft organizes things is generally when you spin up a site to host a document repository, which in Microsoft parlance is a library, the people who have access to the documents that are in that library are the members of the site, and the members of the site are indicated as members by their in Active Directory or Azure Active Directory, to be clear about it. So if I spin up a finance site, automatically there is a finance Microsoft 365 group that gets created, and the members of that group have access to the resources in the finance site, which includes at least one, usually, SharePoint library for the documents. And I agree that there therefore needs to be someone who understands who should be in that finance group and who should not be in that finance group. And there needs to be an understanding that that it's important for the long-term health of sort of governance of documents that you don't like have immediately have exceptions start. So you cannot have like a subfolder buried deep down in that library that you want to tell your IT department, oh, except for this folder only the CFO and the CEO can have access to. The rest of the folders, the finance team can have access to, but not those. No. We do not want to start down that road right off the bat. It's going to work much better if you're thinking about it in terms of governance, that we're going to give this whole thing to the site, and we're going to administer permissions with that group membership, which is what Kyle's talking about with the Azure Active Directory. That does not mean actually SharePoint has a great deal of latitude, and we encourage our clients to use it to give extra permissions to individual files, and the users can do that by doing what's called sharing. So a member of the finance team might share a specific folder with a program manager. That specific folder has the finance documents for that program. The program director can see those documents. They can't see the rest of the finance folder. And then we can run reports as the IT department. We can run reports periodically that says, these are the shares that are sort of the ad hoc shares that have been added. And we can run those by the people in charge of governance to make sure that nothing looks untoward or inappropriate. We can even set up alerts that if certain files or folders are shared, someone gets alerted that sharing happened, so that if, again, somebody's sharing something incorrectly, that can be addressed. I do think there's a role for it. The other role for IT is sort of to slow the sprawl. Microsoft has sort of taken a page out of the whole sort of consumerization of IT, of allowing a lot of latitude to end users to create SharePoint sites when they want to create teams when they want to. And that's great, because a lot of times in the past, IT departments have been a roadblock to moving quickly and getting things done, because you need to put in a ticket and it might take 5 days. And in the meantime, you're losing time. You want to just get this done yourself. And it's not like it's that hard. Microsoft has made these things very easy to do. And so that's sort of one extreme governance style, which is to say, just let 1,000 flowers bloom. We'll figure it out later. And it can be done. Steve, at Community IT, we sort of done that. And I know that at the end of the year, sometimes it's like, what are all these SharePoint sites? What's in them? Who owns them? And is there anything in them? Should we delete them? And it's like, there's like a whole, so if you instead want to like have IT put some sort of slow bumps, like, hey, let's if we're going to create a new team, let's have a process for doing that. You can still do it, but we'd like you to like, indicate that it's done.
Yeah. I think we're getting some questions in the chat for some of the more visual people. So I wonder, Steve, if you could share, I think it's the next slide or the one after, where we had a little bit kind of what you're talking about of structures for SharePoint. So if you want to share your slides again. And then
Yep.
I know we have a poll, but we're going to wait just a minute to get to the poll. So go ahead. So I know, Steve.
Is that not sharing, or you can see it
Yep.
now?
No, I see it. It looks
Okay,
great.
good.
Do you want to talk about this one? I think you had some thoughts.
Yeah. So this is what we were talking about before, the fact that Microsoft gives 18 ways to do the same thing, and both the value of that, because that means that you can find the way that works best for you, but the challenge of it, which is that it can be quite confusing. So the old style SharePoint would be you go to a place that has sharepoint.com in the link address, and the beginning would be, you know, your organization's sort of ID, so .sharepoint.com. And that's sort of traditional SharePoint. And that is, in fact, from a technical perspective, what underlies all these other things. OneDrive is my SharePoint. It has in the URL, actually has the word my in front of it. You'll see it there if you notice those kinds of things. That's supposed to, it's basically a SharePoint library that's been sort of coded and specialized to be just for you. You can do ad hoc sharing from it, but we tell our customers, our clients, that you should think of that as sort of your closet space. No one else is really in there. You can put whatever you want in there. Be aware, of course, that it's owned by your organization. It's not owned by you. So if you are, you know, if you get into a labor dispute or whatever, like, they can take ownership of that in a heartbeat. So don't put stuff in there that is really personal. But certainly things that are private and yours, a great place to put, you know, if you supervise a bunch of people, put annual performance review drafts before they are formally submitted to whatever process they go into. You could put them in there and know that only you have access to them. And if, when the draft is pretty much ready to be submitted, you choose to share it with your direct report, then they would have access to it because you gave them access to it. So that's OneDrive. And then Teams, we talked about before, it's like this whole new user interface. There's, you know, the phone mobile device version, there's the web version in a browser, and then there's the application that you can download and install and run on your Mac or your PC. But it has a whole bunch of nodes on the side. You can, you know, join groups of people that are called teams, hence the name. You can chat individually on an ad hoc basis with your colleagues or other people that are using Teams. Kyle is at Build, I am at Community IT, but we can chat with each other through Teams because we both use Teams. That's good and bad. Sometimes I'm getting chats at times I don't want them, but I have the ability, and Community IT has the ability to sort of lock that down so that only chats can come in from chats can't come in from the outside. So that's configurable.
And just to clarify,
yeah,
you're not talking about my chats. You like getting those. It's
oh,
not
those
a bad
are great.
thing when you get my
yeah,
chats.
Yeah.
You're talking about other people.
Yeah, no, not.
I just wanted to clarify for the audience that we weren't using me as the example in chats that you didn't want to receive.
Not at all.
Okay.
But team for each team, when you create a team in Microsoft Teams, it's basically an amalgamation of different existing services that Microsoft already had. They're just trying to like put this, hopefully in their perspective, better user interface on it. So there are some things that are only in Teams and native to Teams, but a lot of the other stuff is stuff that you can sort of do on your own, or it can be done on its own, but Teams brings it all in one place. So one of the things that you get with a team when you create a new team is that you get a little tab there, and you'll see it, and it's called Files. And when you click on that tab, you see the files that your team is sharing. Well, it's a dirty little secret. It's not a secret, but it's not like advertised. That's a SharePoint site. And you can actually go to that site in SharePoint, and you have permissions to it. You can actually, there's actually a button that says open in SharePoint. So it's confusing because people like there to be one way to do things so that they can do it the right way. Well, it turns out with Microsoft, sometimes there are 18 right ways to do something. It's particularly confusing. I think the worst offense, and probably a misstep by the design team at Microsoft, was that when you're in the OneDrive, in a browser, so again, you have to get there, but when you're in OneDrive in your browser and you see the my-citydc.sharepoint.com, there is below your files a whole list of other, is it called other libraries or other other repositories or something like that. But basically, it's a list of SharePoint libraries that you have access to, but they're sort of being advertised to you in OneDrive, and you can click on them and you can see those files. But now you're accessing them through OneDrive, and then they also invite you. That's fine, I think. But then they invite you to add a shortcut to those files to your OneDrive, and
then you're just like, what am I
it's confusing
doing?
And yes,
exactly.
and it's like it's one place where there's actually a cost to doing things one way. It's like they had two different architectures for how they wanted to make this work, and both work fine, but they don't work well together. And so
it's like two different parts of your brain.
We actually have a fair number of tickets on a regular basis where someone is like, I'm trying to sync this SharePoint library and I can't. And the reason that they can't is because they've already added a link to that library in OneDrive. And it's like there's just like some code problems. That might just get corrected.
We had a question about syncing. If you're working in Teams, are the SharePoint files synced and updated in real time? So
yes,
I think yes,
they are. Yes. And you can sync. There's a sync button in the Teams interface too, so you can actually sync things from there as well. 18
people are talking in the question and answer about like all of the little fiddly things about when you're in OneDrive, et cetera. So I think actually, in the interest of time, Steve, can we go to there's a slide, I'm not sure it's next, where we had like a little structure of like you have your folder, then the other folder, and then the other folder. I think it's the one past this. We can skip over that one. Yeah, that one. Okay. So people had some questions about like how you do the structure. And if we want to talk about that quickly, and then we can go back to that second poll.
Sure.
And I want to make sure Kyle has a chance to talk. Sure. Kyle, do you, when you are doing these projects we've also had some questions about migrations in the chat. And how complicated it can be to do a migration. And I know you guys beforehand were talking a little bit about, do you just like kind of forklift everything over and just keep what you had and put it in the new one? So Kyle, would you like to talk a little bit about like how you approach structures?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's going to be a recurring theme in a lot of my comments that it's really organization specific. And I think that one way to think about it is I've worked with organizations that generate content and there's a need to store that content for historic purposes. There's a need to, and for some organizations, there's a need to store that information for regulatory or compliance reasons. For those organizations that perhaps are not thinking about the tools we're talking about today as collaboration tools and all of the things that Steve talked about in terms of engendering new ways of working and engendering new ways of communicating and talking about files themselves. One approach is to do a little bit of cleanup of whatever system you were using before, be it a file server or be it a platform you want to move off of, and forklift it over. And we use that expression because you're literally moving one thing from one area to a new area. For some organizations, I do think it's an opportunity to ask really important questions about what constitutes high value content and what is our need to surface that content for people across an organization. So I don't know if I answered your question, Carolyn, but it is really organization specific. And I think it's important at the outset to have a shared understanding of what it is that SharePoint is going to do for you. And when I'm talking about SharePoint and this answer to this question, I'm also thinking about Teams and OneDrive as part and parcel of that. But it's really important to have a shared organizational vision of, are we just forklifting our old system into this for the purposes of having greater accessibility and redundancy and maybe retiring some systems or retiring a file server? Or are we really talking about this being a way that people can get better access to the information that they need to do their work?
That's a great segue into our poll. So Steve, if you want to go back a slide, I'm going to go ahead and launch it. Thank you, Kyle, for queuing that up.
I didn't even mean to, and why don't I get to vote in these polls? I noticed that I'm not allowed to vote.
So this second poll that we had was, why are you using or thinking about using SharePoint? And the options are, we are retiring a file server and going to the cloud. So like we were speaking about earlier, you had the server in the closet and that's where the files lived, and you had to make a SharePoint site that was hosted on that server that you had. And that's where all your files were. And now you're not going to do that anymore. So you're going into the cloud. That's the first option. Or we are already using SharePoint and want to get better. So, I mean, so many organizations are using Office 365 now, and probably particularly on this webinar. So you already have SharePoint, like kind of, as Steve was saying, as the back end. You're accessing it through Teams, perhaps. You're accessing it. You have a OneDrive, et cetera. But you want to understand it better and use it better and be more efficient, and maybe train new staff members better on, like, how do I find that file? Where is that file? Where is that team? And then we also have the option, we want to migrate from a different file storage solution in the cloud to SharePoint. So you're in a different cloud server and you are service and you want to move over to SharePoint, maybe because you're using Office 365, you want to better align that, and then not available. So I'm going to go ahead and end this. I think everyone's pretty much put in their answers and share it. Kyle, do you want to, sorry, you couldn't vote. Do you want to say what the results were?
Sure. I'm going to need my readers for this. So 17% of people have files on premise in a file server, and they're going to they want to move to the cloud. I'm surprised by this, but 65% of people are already using SharePoint and want to get better at it. And the next one is people who want to migrate from a different file storage solution in the cloud, so something like Dropbox or perhaps Google, to SharePoint. And 1% said it's not applicable.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, everyone, for filling in those polls. It helps us. And we actually have a question about migration that we just came in. Does it matter who moves or owns the files in the migration? And I'm not sure, Kyle, if that is a question about, as we were talking about earlier with Kyle, the presenter, is there an owner at the organization that owns the migration? Versus, I'm not sure if this question is about if you personally have your files, but they're going to be part of a migration.
So yeah, I'd want to understand that question a little bit more.
Kyle, level on the attendees, can you clarify a little bit? And we'll come back to that.
Excellent. Thank you, Carolyn.
Sure.
A couple more things about sort of the migration, I would say. I have a heuristic that I use for, and I probably have used it on a webinar before, so if you've heard me say it before, I apologize. But if you hire someone new to your staff, and of course they don't know where files are on day one, but if on day 30, if after a month, they can probably find a file without asking an old timer, where would I find this file? You're probably in good shape, and you probably can do a forklift. If it's been 6 months, I'm exaggerating for effect, and your new staff are still like, so-and-so told me to find the reports on the such and such project from 2019. I have no idea where to find those. Can you give me a hint? That's probably a situation that needs to be remedied. And I would say, think about moving from an old system to SharePoint, or from any old system to any new system, as an opportunity to fix things that need to be fixed. But maybe it's a little bit like moving from one house to another. Like, here's your chance to like take a bunch of stuff to the thrift store, give a bunch of stuff away, do your yard sale, just take some of it to the landfill. I'm sorry, but whatever. Like, you don't need to take everything to your new house. And it's just, stuff has just piled up. It's a bunch of crap. Now's your chance to get rid of it. You weren't motivated before, but now you're motivated because you're going to a new place. At the same time, you probably don't have time to like sort through every last thing. So like, there's probably a drawer in your house that's the junk drawer. And do you want to spend 4 hours like going through each of those junk things and saying, I'm going to keep this because I might need it later? I'm not sure about these paper clips. Let me think about, no, you're going to you're going to create a cardboard box called drunk drawer box. You're going to dump the stuff in there, and then you're going to have a new drunk drawer box at your new house. And is that ideal? No, but is it realistic? Because of all, I think it's real. So those balances, I mean, it's a metaphor, but those are the kinds of things that you're thinking about. There's a lot of time required to really clean things up and change things. So you need to know that it's worth it. And you need to sort of draw some lines. At some point, it's not worth like looking at each especially since it's not something that interns can do. Like they don't have the institutional knowledge. It really takes people who are probably valuable employees to make decisions about whether or not files should be trashed or moved or whatever. So you want to try to get a lot of bang for your buck by working at this at the high level. The other thing that I'll just say is that the one thing that I really strongly believe is that a migration from one system to another is a chance to clean up your permissions. And I think that's what Kyle was talking about. So whether or not you throw away files or not isn't as important to me, because extra files sort of floating around don't actually hurt things that much. Storage is just so cheap that it's not like, it's a little bit different from the house metaphor. It's like you're moving to an electronic house that has endless space in the closets, and you can just sort of keep piling stuff up forever. And really the cost is not the storage cost. The cost is that you have to sort through it to find things. And that is a cost. But the permissions are kind of important, because if people can get to files that they shouldn't be able to get to, that's a risk to your organization. If people can see salary information that you don't want them to see or whatever, so we do not generally, when we do migrations, we do not attempt to migrate permissions. We migrate files. So if you have a finance folder on your server or in your old system and you want that moved to a finance library in SharePoint, we ask you who should have access to that SharePoint library, carte blanche across the top, understanding that finance people can share individual files or folders with others later, but who should have access to that finance library? Those files are going to be moved to there, and those people will have access to it. We are not going to attempt to migrate all the little exceptions and breaks and things, and let's not do that. So that is our and it's partly a practice centered in a deep belief that it's important to do that once in a while, clean up your permissions and start fresh. But it's also partly because the tooling actually makes it hard to migrate permissions. And I will say that is one of the costs of moving from another cloud file system to any other cloud file system, is that oftentimes doesn't matter as much with file server migrations. But when you're migrating from, say, I don't know, Dropbox to SharePoint, it makes a world of sense to you that we shouldn't be paying for Dropbox. We already are in Microsoft 365. Let's put the stuff in SharePoint. That's fine. But one of the costs that you need to be aware of, it may be worth it, but just be aware of it, is all of the sharing that's happening from Dropbox. Okay, this contractor has access to this Dropbox, this contractor has access to this Dropbox folder. Well, when you put it in SharePoint, you're going to have to sort of recreate that again in the new space, because it's not going to come over. And
it could be an opportunity.
It could be an opportunity, but it's just something, it really hurts when people are trying to, Google is probably the hardest source for this. If you want to get out of Google Drive and into SharePoint, because the permissions on Google, there's just so many of them. People have shared so much out of Google Drive in so many different ways. Some of the stuff that you think is yours in Google is actually somebody else's that they've shared with you, and it appears to be yours. You don't even know that, and that gets hard. And if they're Google Docs, well, SharePoint doesn't host a Google Doc. They only take Word docs. I mean, it'll be converted, but that conversion can be a challenge technically. So anyway.
Can I just...
Go ahead.
Yeah, I promise I'll keep this to 30 seconds or less. Just three quick things. One is, I love what Steve said about if somebody can't find something at day 30 that is vital to the work they do, and it's happening on a regular basis, you likely have a problem that needs to be remedied. I love that. The other thing I'd say that I agree with what Steve said, that if you're going to spend time and energy on a SharePoint implementation, since Steve threw out a metric, I would say 25% of the overall time and budget should be spent on answering the question of, are we doing a forklift or are we bringing things over, and what those file structures are. I think that there is enormous value in the other things that we've talked about. Is SharePoint right for us? How are we going to support people in making the change? And how are we going to support them after we have made the change? And then I promise this is the last thing, and it's really quickly, is one thing I would add to something Steve said from a technical perspective. If you have a file on your file server, sorry, if you have a folder on your file server, and you know who you are, from the 2011 gala, and there are 1,400 unedited photos in there, along with the original unedited copy of the entire gala, along with all of the assets that you have made final, you should be working with an implementation partner to find those files and work to figure out what's worth retaining, because those big image files and those big video files are things you don't want to forklift over because of the storage costs associated with them.
That's a great way to think about it. Like, is anyone ever going to go back into that folder? And if they do, are they going to be able to find that photo that they want?
Do you need the picture of the person with the food in their mouth, their mouth's open and the fork's hanging out? You probably don't need to keep it.
Exactly. And if no one went through in 2011 and pulled out the best photos, then yeah. So I want to make sure, actually, Steve, could we skip ahead to, we're getting up a little bit close to the hour.
Sure.
We've got tons of good questions coming in. So I wanted to just actually go back to the learning objectives. I want to read quickly about learning what SharePoint is, how it's used in file sharing, knowing more about choosing it as a sharing solution. Clearly, we scratched the surface. And I know it's frustrating. In the Q&A, I've also had to say a couple of times, like, it depends. It really depends on your organization, your culture, and what you're trying to do. And then understand the concepts in creating the file sharing architecture for your nonprofit. Steve, if you can go to the next one, I want to make sure to tell everyone about our upcoming webinar, which is actually in just a couple of weeks. We're going to have Matt Eshelman from Community IT, who's our cybersecurity guru, talk about security training for nonprofit grantees. So he's been doing a project over the past year or so working with a funder who is very concerned about especially email security and making sure that their grantees had training on, knowing those fake emails and not to click. And if you do click, who to tell. So they had a lot of lessons learned from that. It's really fascinating case study, and they're going to talk about that. It's a week earlier than we usually do. It's going to be the second week of October on October 12th. So please sign up for that if you are a grantee, a grantor, a funder, or interested in cybersecurity. They're going to talk about some of those tools. So invite you back for that. And then Steve, if you can go to the last slide, maybe we could take some questions from the Q&A. Here are all of our contact information, where to find more information, past webinars on both of our websites that we have videos of we've done some on SharePoint over the years. So you may find if you had some questions about SharePoint, we may have some other materials for you. If you have in the Q&A, there were a couple of pretty specific questions. I would say get in touch with us directly for some of the more like how-to, like I have this situation at my organization and I am not able to see this in that file or, whatever it is. Just get in touch with us directly about those types of questions. But now I wanted to go back into the questions because Kyle Lovell actually got back in touch with us about the migration. He says, we are a department migrating to OneDrive and SharePoint from Dropbox. Is it best practice to move the files to SharePoint and then people can access them via their own OneDrive? Or does the individual move the files to OneDrive and share? Do you have that seems like a kind of a question coming from the beginning of the process. So do you have some ways to think about it?
Can I answer first? Because I think what I have to say is pretty quick, and then I'm very curious what Steve has to say about this. I think for me, 3 or 4 years ago, OneDrive was a big part of the way that I worked. And truthfully, it has become less important. And Teams has become much more important to me in conjunction with SharePoint. And I only share that, it's only my experience with it. But I think what I would say is, hearing what Steve said about OneDrive being really your personal place to work, the truth is that and don't tell our managed service provider this, but most of the work that I do is on my desktop independently, and then I'm very quickly moving it into a team, or I'm chatting about it with somebody through Teams. So most of my documents are in the cloud, but truthfully for me, OneDrive has become much less of a place that I engage with on a regular basis. It's the place that I store things that I might want to come back to someday. So I just wanted to make sure that in that question, Kyle, great name by the way, that you're not forgetting about Teams. And at least my experience, and I think many people on the call's experience, Teams has taken a more prevalent role, in my view, as opposed to OneDrive. And Steve, I'm very curious your perspective on that, including disagreeing entirely.
No, that's fine the way you're describing it. I mean, when you're working in your desktop, if you have OneDrive set up the way Microsoft defaults, you're saving it to your desktop. You're actually saving it to OneDrive. It's kind of like transparent to you, but like there's a sync engine syncing all the files on your desktop to your OneDrive, so that if your laptop goes kahooey one day, you actually can get all those files back because they're actually in a folder called desktop in your OneDrive account. Yeah, that's fine. And I think, in terms of the original sort of way we would do things, I would say self-service is okay. In fact, it's probably fine if you really have a sophisticated or at least willing to follow instructions and do their best, like staff. And you can just say, hey, we're using Dropbox. We want to get the stuff into here are the different Teams libraries we've created, again, knowing that Teams libraries are SharePoint libraries. And these are the places that we've created. These are the SharePoint libraries that we've created. You have access to the ones you should have access to. Please move the stuff from your Dropbox to the appropriate place. You have 2 weeks, get it done. You have 3 weeks, get it done. I think that approach can work. It's certainly inexpensive. The advantages of having IT do it, whether that's an MSP or a service provider that you hire for like on a contract to do this, is that you get a lot more logging and attention. So if you're just dragging and dropping, there's always a chance that something doesn't move and no one notices or doesn't know it. You should be able to, with Dropbox to SharePoint, there should be tools that can hook into Dropbox on the back end and hook into SharePoint on the back end and sort of move things over. That is something that works pretty well for just about everything, except again, Google is the odd man out or odd person out or whatever, just because it's like a very, very different sort of approach to file cloud storage in general. I want to say one other thing. I know we're out of time, but I want to say one other thing, Carolyn.
Jump in for 2 seconds, Steve. So I wanted to thank everybody for coming because we're coming up to the hour. I know I can stay on, but I know Kyle has to get off. So what I want to make sure to say to everyone is if we didn't get to your question, there's so many great questions in chat. So what I'm going to do is I'll take those questions that we didn't answer and I will pull them out and put them in the transcript and see if we can get Steve and Kyle to give us some written answers to those outstanding questions. So if you put a question in and we didn't get to it, because there was so much good stuff to talk about, look back maybe next week. You'll get an email as an attendee or registrant with the link to the video and the transcript. So check back there for your question to be answered. I'm sorry, Kyle.
No, I wasn't going to say anything other than
Steve.
I really appreciate, again, you having me today. As always, I learn a ton on these webinars, and it's always helpful to round out the experience I have with the experience, Carolyn, that you have, and Steve, that you have as well.
Yeah, this has been just great. I'm sorry, Steve, I cut you off. So if
That's okay. It's been great having you, Kyle. And if you need to roll, you roll. But did you notice that Susan Eichenberry asked, can you comment on using metadata versus folders?
Ooh, I'm going to leave that one for you.
We also got a question about the
take care, everyone.
Bye, Kyle. Using SharePoint as a digital asset management. So for photos, videos,
right,
those big files. And I think you kind of answered that earlier, Steve, that if you really work with a lot of those photos and videos, that you probably need a more dedicated asset management.
Yeah, I don't think we covered it
SharePoint is not
in the
gonna.
webinar, but that is the answer. The answer on that question is like, SharePoint is a perfectly functional, lightweight digital asset management tool. Although I would not like to use it for big video files, but for photos, it's fine if all you want is like the very basic stuff. You can tag things, you get information when you use what's called an asset library. It's a special kind of library. You get information like right as you're clicking through, you can see without opening the individual files. You can see things like pixels, width ratio and all that kind of stuff. But if you really are into proper digital asset management, it is not a purpose-built digital asset management tool, and it's not going to meet the like heavy duty, full on purpose-built tools. It's like the same answer that we give people that are like, if you're a lawyer and you want to use SharePoint for your keeping track of all your casework, or you're a law firm, or fine. I think SharePoint is fine. I think it's a nice lightweight place to keep documents, but it's not as good as there are systems that are built. They're very expensive, but they're purpose built for legal documents, and they're just better. It's like, it's just what you get. What I wanted to say, well, I may answer Suzanne's question because it's a great one, commenting on metadata versus folders. Metadata is kind of the old style of organizing. And it's part of a theme that I feel like we didn't highlight, and now it's after 4. And so those of you who are sticking with us, you get
thank you for sticking with us.
Yes, but let me do the theme first. In general, I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat. I was trying to answer some as we were talking about next webinar and so on. A lot of questions seem like they're coming from like the perspective of, we set up SharePoint in 2015, we set up SharePoint in 2016, and now we're wondering, now you're telling us things that don't quite jibe with the way we've been doing them. And Kyle at the very beginning talked about how his practice, my practice, our practice has evolved, and how the platform has evolved. And that's absolutely true. And so there's a lot of like new ways of doing things. And when I say new, I don't know where I'd put it, 2018 maybe, they introduced this whole thing about modern sites, the whole integration with Azure Active Directory. It used to be that SharePoint was very much a standalone product. It was available from Microsoft 365, but it really wasn't fully integrated. So there's so many things that are different now. And in some ways, painful as this might be, it would be, I would say not in almost all ways, it's a lot easier at this point to migrate files from a file server into a modern SharePoint environment that we build from scratch than it might be, unfortunately, to like take an 8-year-old SharePoint environment that was built according to the best practices of 8 years ago. And now we're like, we're seeing it's clunky around the edges. We're seeing all these problems. And you tell us about all these, we see all these things that we'd like to have, but like we have to like convert these sites to modern and make everything different. That's actually a harder thing to do, unfortunately, to like move things around. So that's just, so Suzanne, I think in those cases, metadata is a 2015, 2016 way of organizing things. It just never really worked. Folders are something that for whatever reason, the staff at your organization they know how to put files in the right folder, hopefully. It's very difficult to get people to tag things with metadata. And so we have sort of stopped trying to use metadata. Beth Lambert, 5,000 file limit. I'm just going to answer it real quick. I was just going to ask that question. It's like a question. It's a question from 2015, 2016. No offense, Beth, but it's like, it's just not a real thing so much anymore. It's still a real limit that will pop up. Yeah, it's a real limit, but you can buy extra storage, correct? No. The 5,000 file limit is that if you are opening a SharePoint site in a browser and there are more than 5,000 items in that view, it will cause problems. But as soon as you put things in subfolders and subfolders, so let's say you have a library that has 20,000 items in it. That sounds like it's more than 5,000. But actually, if you have 6 folders in the root of your site, and each of those folders contains 4,000 items in it, you have 24,000 items, and at no point are you exceeding the 5,000 limit, because you open the root of the library and you see 6 folders, you open up a folder and you see 4,000 items less than 5,000, no problem. So it's just like, there's a lot of new stuff, and it's not that new, but I understand that if you built a site some time ago, and we built some of those sites. So it's not anyone's fault. It's just the way the technology has evolved.
Yeah, I feel like I'm loving this because we're getting so many questions on that it's clearly there's a need to understand better. If you built out SharePoint, 8 years ago,
What can you do?
What do you do now? So
Yeah.
I feel like that is a webinar in our future.
Maybe so.
And I'm so happy to get all of these questions, and all of you who've been asking these questions, you're on our email list now. So you will get notification when we do this future SharePoint webinar about sites versus file sharing. So I think that's a really great question and something that we clearly need to answer. I'm amazed that so many people have stayed on for our 5 minutes extra, but I do want to let people go. So I want to thank everyone. I want to thank you, Steve. Thank you, Kyle, who had to leave actually at the hour. And we appreciate you so much. And thanks for being with us today. And we hope you'll come back to another webinar in the future. Thank you.
Thank you all. It was really fun. Sorry that we didn't get to everything. I like getting to everything.
We'll answer it in the transcript.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.